What do we mean when we talk about medical negligence?
Just because something has gone wrong or they haven't had the outcome that they expected doesn't mean that there's been medical negligence.
One question virtually every client asks us is, how long is it going to take? That's a very difficult one to answer, isn't it?
If this stops even one other family from having to go through what we've gone through, or one other person from having to go what I'm going through, it'll be worth it.
How much is it going to cost? And what am I likely to receive at the end of it? Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Medical Negligence Matters. Today we're going to be talking about what medical negligence is and covering some of the questions that we're most frequently asked about this area of the law. And today I'm joined by my good friend and colleague and expert solicitor, Tami Frankel. Welcome, Tami. Thanks
Hi.
for joining me. So what do we mean when we talk about medical negligence?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because people generally know what they mean by negligence in any other sphere, car accidents or anything. And so they think they know what medical negligence is. And the difficulty is that just because something has gone wrong or they haven't had the outcome that they expected doesn't mean that there's been medical negligence.
Exactly. You're quite right. I mean, I think that the problem, medicine is incredibly complex. And of course, for most people who having interactions with doctors have got something wrong with them in the first place. And very often it's difficult to separate out what is part of that underlying disease process or illness and what might have been caused by some
decision that someone has or hasn't made. But also there can be more than one decision that's acceptable. There can be a range of treatment options. And so the doctor may have opted for one or may have recommended one, which the patient's gone ahead with. And in retrospect, actually, if they'd had the other treatment option, things, as it turns out, for them would have been different. But at the time when they were making the decision, that wasn't to be known. And you can't criticise that doctor for that decision.
Exactly. It's shades of grey, isn't it, really? And I think that, going back to basics, I mean, when we say, as you say, negligence for a doctor really means doing something that wouldn't be regarded as acceptable by any other doctor in the same field, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, and some people think, well, that's a bit unfair because they're setting their own standards. But really, because doctors are practicing in such a specialist field, that in a sense they have to set their own standards.
Yeah. Who else could say what's reasonable for somebody in that situation to advise, to do, to offer as a treatment plan?
Yeah. So a doctor's not negligent if they do something which other reasonably competent doctors would regard as acceptable practice,
No.
I guess, even if there's other people who would disagree with them.
Well, we sometimes get expert reports and they say things like, the option chosen or offered or whatever is not the one that I would choose or offer. However, it's not unreasonable, and so I can't criticise them for it. And so you've got somebody saying, I wouldn't do it that way, but just because I wouldn't do it that way doesn't mean it was wrong to do it that way. And sadly, whatever the unwanted outcome has been for that patient, there hasn't been negligence there.
I think that's right, isn't it? People come to us and sometimes with quite sort of terrible outcomes from the medical treatment they've had. And I guess very often the first thing that they want is an explanation and an answer, so that they can understand exactly what's happened to them, because it's not always clear. And I guess one of the most important things for us is to try and to begin with to understand what the client wants and what they want to achieve.
Yeah, but sometimes you find out that what they came to you with, my operation went wrong or whatever, and then you look and you say, actually, no, the options, everything that's done, but you think, but you should have been referred by your GP 3 months earlier and then you would have had a different option. And your client can be resistant. No, my GP's been brilliant. Every time I went back, they were so lovely. And it's like, yes, but what they didn't do was the thing they should do. And sometimes it's really difficult actually convincing someone that they do have a claim, but it's not the claim they thought, and it's against someone who they don't necessarily want to sue. It can be really difficult.
Yeah, that's true. And also I think we're looking at what people want to achieve. I mean, sometimes I guess if you've suffered a really bad injury, then financial compensation is really important.
Yeah.
Because if you're injured in such a way which means you can no longer work, then you still have to pay the bills and you still have to eat. And so the financial compensation can be really important. But I think that for many people, the explanation and the understanding of what's happened is just as important, or at least at the outset.
I think, especially in deaths, I find, especially because sometimes the money is not so important there. It doesn't matter so much. They maybe have insurances, maybe they were older or it was a child or something, but they really need to know what happened. They really need to understand what happened to whoever it is who's died.
Yes, I think so. And I think it's that understanding of what's happened enables people, I guess, to come to terms with what's happened and to move on from it. Because I think there's nothing worse when some tragedy has happened to you, for that then to define the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I feel what's really important about what we do is to help people get beyond that, to move on in whatever way is best for them.
They can do that even if we can't proceed with a claim, because of course we're always investigating and reassessing all the way through. And I have had instances where you get a negative report, but in particular in deaths or something, they've said, actually, it's kind of a comfort to know that nothing should have been done differently, that this couldn't have been avoided. And so you get them a beneficial outcome, something that helps them move on. You don't get them any money, you don't get them any compensation, but you get them peace of mind because the reports we get are unbiased. They feel they can trust them. Even if the hospital has told them that, there's always a part of them that thinks, is this really unbiased? Isn't that what they'd say anyway?
Yeah. I mean, medical negligence can cover a vast number of different things, isn't it, really? I mean, I'm thinking about the sorts of cases that we deal with. I mean, it really, from injuries caused during birth, either to mothers or to babies, errors that go wrong in surgery. What else do we
all sorts
come
of
across?
Failures as well. So failures to think about treatment options, failures to send someone for tests or to think about other diagnoses. The lot of a doctor is quite, it's quite broad what they have to think about when someone comes in to see them. And it's easy for them to overlook a potential outcome, to not recommend a particular test is carried out. So I think it isn't part of that is why it's so different to other sorts of claims, because other doctors will excuse one. They will say what's reasonable, although it was possible for a doctor to do or recommend or think about this. It's not negligent that they didn't. It was reasonable that they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've highlighted, I think, one of the main differences between medical negligence and maybe some other types of accident claims. I mean, things like road traffic accidents or accidents at work. I mean, one of the major differences, I think, is often the liability, the fault in those sort of circumstances is fairly clear-cut, usually, or it's fairly easy to get to the bottom of that. Whereas in medical negligence, it's much more difficult because you can't, without having independent expert advice, it's very difficult to establish negligence at all.
But it's a step before that. You do need to know where to look, because you need to instruct the right expert. So you need to be thinking, where is it likely that this went wrong? And you do need some experience to be able to do that. Yeah,
you're right. And I think obviously the first thing is you need to find the right solicitor if you're going to think about bringing a claim, don't you? Because I think it's important to find somebody who really knows about medical negligence, not just any other area of the law, because you say that's the first step. And from that, that expert will be able to lead you in the right direction, for the investigations.
Yeah, and I think people think that a solicitor who does personal injury cases will be able to help. But of course, what they don't have is the experience of looking at medical notes critically, like we do, having seen a million medical reports and be able to think, actually, should that have been done sooner? Aren't there other types of treatments? Those sort of questions which are in our heads and can go in our letters of instruction as questions, because of course we're not medically trained. But it does mean we're likely to narrow it down more quickly to get the right expert, to get the right result.
You're right. I think the expertise in being able to analyse medical records is very important, because from in any medical negligence case, that is the primary evidence, is what's written down in the notes. And the solicitor has to be capable of reading those and understanding them. And as you say, not in a clinical context. I mean, we're not medical experts, but you need to be able to understand what's there. And I think that there's several accreditations for clinical negligence solicitors.
Yes,
and I think that is very important for people to look for.
Because how else will somebody who Well, you hope that if you do need a solicitor for a medical negligence matter, that it's the one and only time in your life you'll need it. So how do people know who they need? And really, the accreditations are the way to do it. We like to be.
It's a third party assessment, isn't it, of the range of experience in particular. I mean, anybody, in order to get accreditation, either from Action Against Medical Accidents, a charity that helps patients, or indeed from the Law Society, nobody can get onto those or can achieve that sort of accreditation without being able to really demonstrate a proper degree of experience and expertise and a track record
you have
for
to give
successfully
them,
dealing with cases.
You have to give them details of the cases you've dealt with, anonymised, obviously, but they're real cases and they've got case numbers if they've been issued. So they double check that you really did do this work. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So people can be assured that that person with that accreditation has a level of experience, which is what you really need if you're going to investigate a clinical negligence case.
One question virtually every client asks us is, how long is it going to take? That's a very difficult one to answer, isn't it?
And you can completely understand why they want to know how long it'll take. And it feels a little awkward sometimes when you can't tell them. But of course, you can't tell them because you can't know how long the various steps are going to take, or even always how many. You can say, we're going to get a first report from this expert who's told us it will be 3 months until they get their report to us. However, you don't know when you get that report what it's going to say. Is it going to say, but you also need, for instance, an anaesthetist or something? Or is it going to be the final report you'll need? I think when you speak to people and explain it to them face to face, they do understand, but in advance they don't, and it can be.
It is a difficult one, isn't it? And I think for many people it can seem like an awfully long time to get.
I mean, the truth is, it is.
Through, and it is. You're right. But I think that what's most important, and I've always felt this is true, that there's no point promising somebody a quick, a rapid outcome for their claim when actually that might not be the right result. I think it's more important to get the right result than it is to get necessarily a quick one.
And I think clients agree with that. They want to know how long it'll take, but they understand when they can't know. But also, as long as you can give them times for each step. So you say, I can't tell you because I don't know exactly how many steps, but we're getting our first report from XYZ who said it'll be here in 3 months. And then at 3 months, you let them have it. Or if for some reason you can't, you let them know why you can't. But you keep them informed all the way.
I think that's right. I think you do hear horror stories, don't you, of people who sort of instruct solicitors and then don't hear from them for years and years and years. And that should never happen.
That should never happen.
I think you should always know what's happening with your case. And as you say, although each step may take some time, at least if you know how long you're likely to be waiting at each stage, it does make it a little more bearable.
And why you're waiting. So, I'm waiting for this person who is a practicing doctor in this area of law and is going to provide us with an expert report. And I know I'm probably going to be able to rely on whatever this person says, and it's going to help me to deal with it and to investigate my case.
Yeah. And it's also true, of course, that in some very serious cases where liability might be admitted at an earlier point, it is possible to get interim payments, which, if for people who have got some serious financial difficulties because of their injuries, I mean, it's not applicable in every case by any means, but it is something that we can always consider in the right cases.
And also, it's not just the financial difficulties. If whatever's happened to them means that they're, for instance, now wheelchair dependent, it can actually make a huge difference to their life in that they can move into temporary accommodation that's been specially adapted for them, so their life can actually be improved. Yeah, interim payments are a brilliant thing. And of course, not all solicitors would be able to do that. They wouldn't know how to make the application, what evidence they'd need.
Yeah, no, a true specialist is really important, isn't it? So another question, obviously, that all clients are interested in at the outset is how much is it going to cost? And what am I likely to receive at the end of it? And those are really difficult questions to answer. I think in terms of cost, I mean, one of the legal aid is still available for a very small number of cases, small. Isn't it? But it's really not something.
And it's not a great option because, of course, you can't choose to work with the experts who you know are the best experts in their field and the best for your clients. And as we were just talking about, clients like to know how long it's going to take. The legal aid agency itself can take an absolute age in dealing with your requests.
That's true.
More theoretical.
So there are other options. Legal expenses insurance, which some people do have on their house contents policies, not necessarily a great solution for clinical negligence cases because because
limits on them.
Yeah, the indemnities are usually fairly low. Or no win, no fee agreements. And I think those really have been enormously valuable for medical negligence
They really
work,
have allowed people to bring claims who otherwise wouldn't have been able to. Those sort of people on average incomes who earn too much for legal aid, but really couldn't afford their own solicitor's bills, and certainly couldn't afford to take the risk of losing and having to pay the other side's costs.
Absolutely. And good solicitors should be able to offer a genuine no win, no fee agreement, so that in the event that the case is lost, that there's no financial risk for the client at all.
From day one,
Absolutely.
not without asking the client to pay for a report or some sort of assessment first, without taking a penny for the client.
And what about this question about how much a client might receive? I mean, that is a really difficult, isn't it?
It
one,
is.
because when a client walks through the door, the amount of information that you have about the case at that stage is usually fairly limited.
Yeah.
And compensation is dictated to such a large extent, not only by the physical or psychological injury that's been suffered, but also the financial out-of-pocket expenses.
The outcome for that individual.
So loss of earnings, cost of care. I mean, obviously, if someone's very seriously disabled and needs full-time care, then the cost of providing that can be enormous.
Yes,
and I'm always sort of slightly wary of any lawyer who would give a cast iron guarantee about
they can't
costs, or not cost, about compensation when the client walks through the door, because it's impossible to know.
It's impossible. The one thing you would know is that that's not going to be the figure, whatever figure you tell them on that day is not going to be. And of course, it can also be impacted by things like how they would have been anyway, because not everybody going in for treatment is going to come out completely well afterwards, even if it has gone as it should have. They may have had some disability, some limitations in any event, which again is why you really do need specialists who know what they're looking at.
You've got to untangle those
All of
things.
that.
And I mean, the huge compensation awards that you see reported in the media sometimes, of course, are largely those financial losses, aren't they, really? Because in this country, the compensation for the physical and psychological injuries is usually fairly limited. And some people find it quite surprising at how low those figures are. But of course, the cost of providing full-time care for somebody, or the cost of providing adapted accommodation, the cost of providing adapted vehicles, physiotherapy, other sorts of therapies that people might need, obviously is very expensive. And it's the cost of those that add up to the
those are really the things that people need. They're the things that make their lives better.
Yeah, because of course the whole point of compensation, I think this is what some people don't really understand, is to put you back in the position that you would have been in, so far as that's possible, if the injury hadn't occurred. It's not like a lottery win. You're not suddenly getting a huge sum of money.
And some people do seem to feel that. They feel quite resentful of people who have had an award from the NHS or from doctors, don't they? I think the word win isn't really a good word to use about it, winning a case.
It's a recovery rather than a win.
Yeah,
and I think... and I do find, some people are wary about suing the NHS. And I think that is, I find it difficult to believe that people really think that the NHS should somehow be exempt. We know when negligence that causes injury in any other sphere of life, people would rightly think, well, you
doctor ran your child over on a zebra crossing. You wouldn't be saying, oh, she is a doctor, let's not sue them for my child's head injury. But if it's during the course of delivery or they fail to give something for a disease, then you sometimes clients are a bit dubious about doing it. I know it doesn't make sense.
I think it's difficult. I think one thing that's really important is accountability. Yeah. And I think that's a hugely important aspect of what we do. You're not suing the NHS just for the sake of doing it, but really, I think when mistakes happen, it's really important that people look at why they have happened. We have endless inquiries into things, but I think it's really important to understand why things have gone wrong and hopefully to learn from that.
Well, that's
because that's what most people want to know, is that it's not going to happen again.
They say, if this stops even one other family from having to go through what we've gone through, or one other person from having to go what I'm going through, it'll be worth it. Because, of course, bringing a claim takes a lot of effort from clients as well. They have to. Yeah,
it's a long and difficult, stressful process. And so, good lawyers can reduce some of that, but there's no removing it altogether.
No, you need their input at every stage.
Well, thanks, Tami. I mean, we've covered a huge number of things today, and I think we'll have to come back to some of these maybe in future episodes.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be good. Thank you.